Most green card holders think of taxes as just a financial obligation. File your return, pay what you owe, and move on. But a tax mistake in the United States can do much more than trigger an IRS penalty. In some situations, it can create serious immigration complications, delays in getting U.S. citizenship, allegations of misrepresentation, and in extreme cases, even the risk of removal proceedings. The reason is straightforward. Once you become a lawful permanent resident, the government expects you to follow U.S. tax rules in essentially the same way citizens do. If you file the wrong type of return, fail to report income from another country, or submit tax information that doesn't match what you've put on immigration forms, it can create red flags that stay in your record for years. What makes this more worrying is that many green card holders make these mistakes without realizing it. Sometimes it happens because they use a tax preparer who doesn't understand immigration implications. Sometimes it's because income from abroad was never reported. And sometimes it's because people don't realize that certain tax choices can make it look like they've given up their permanent resident status. In this video, we're going to look at 5 tax mistakes that green card holders should avoid, especially during tax season, because these are exactly the kinds of issues that can resurface years later when you apply for citizenship. And one of the mistakes near the end almost always surprises people the first time they hear about it. Hi, I'm Olivia from the USA Guide. I've experienced the immigration process from multiple angles, and today I want to explain something many permanent residents don't fully appreciate: how your dealings with the IRS and your immigration status can be connected. A lot of people assume taxes and immigration are completely separate systems, but in reality, your tax history becomes part of your long-term record in the U.S. That means how you file, which forms you use, and how you report your income can affect future naturalization applications and other immigration filings. My goal here is to make the rules clear so you can avoid mistakes that might cause unnecessary problems later. We'll go through 5 key points every green card holder should understand when filing U.S. taxes. Some of these rules are very different from the way taxes work in other countries, which is why they catch people off guard. But once you know them, it becomes much easier to protect your immigration status and stay on track toward U.S. citizenship. Let's begin with the first rule, a rule many people only discover after they've already filed incorrectly. It concerns how the United States treats income earned anywhere in the world. The first thing every green card holder needs to know is that from the moment you become a lawful permanent resident, the IRS's view of your income changes. From that point on, you're treated for tax purposes almost like a U.S. citizen. A central part of that is worldwide income reporting. In practice, this means the IRS expects you to report your income regardless of where it was earned. It doesn't matter whether the money came from a job in the U.S., a business in your home country, or an investment in another part of the world. If you hold a green card, the IRS expects that income to appear on your U.S. tax return. This is a big surprise for people from countries where tax systems focus only on income earned inside their borders. In the U.S., if you own a business overseas, the income that business produces must be reported. If you have rental property abroad that generates rent, that must be reported too. If you do freelance work, consulting, investing, or run side businesses outside the U.S., all of that income is expected to go on your U.S. return. Reporting foreign income doesn't always mean you'll be taxed twice on the same money. There are credits and rules designed to reduce or eliminate double taxation. But the critical requirement is that you disclose the income accurately. When people don't report foreign income, they sometimes think it doesn't matter because the money never physically entered the U.S. The IRS doesn't view it that way. Failing to report income can lead to penalties, audits, and accusations of tax fraud. And for a green card holder, those issues can go beyond taxes and spill over into immigration later, especially when applying for citizenship. Immigration officers commonly review tax compliance as part of naturalization. A decision that seemed like a small mistake years earlier can become a major point of concern when your file is being reviewed. That's why understanding worldwide income rules is so important for permanent residents. Once you have a green card, full transparency about your income becomes essential. Before we move on, If this kind of explanation is useful and you want more clear breakdowns of U.S. rules that affect immigrants, stay tuned to the USA Guide for more educational content like this. Many immigration problems start with small misunderstandings that could have been avoided with the right information. The second mistake we're about to cover surprises many green card holders because it involves something that looks simple but can send the wrong legal signal: the specific tax form you file. As a permanent resident, the IRS expects you to file as a resident using Form 1040, the same individual income tax return used by U.S. citizens and other tax residents. However, some green card holders mistakenly file Form 1040NR instead. That form is meant for non-resident taxpayers. On the surface, the difference may look technical, especially if an accountant unfamiliar with immigration prepared the return or if the filing was rushed. But the choice of form carries legal meaning. Filing Form 1040NR is effectively telling the government you are a non-resident for tax purposes. For someone who has a green card, that position can conflict with the very nature of permanent residency. In some circumstances, immigration authorities may view the use of a non-resident return as evidence that you are holding yourself out as someone who does not permanently reside in the U.S. That, in turn, can trigger questions about whether you intended to maintain your permanent resident status. This is why selecting the correct tax form is so important. A green card holder is generally expected to file as a resident with Form 1040, reflecting the obligations attached to permanent residency. While many incorrect filings are honest errors, it's much safer to make sure your returns correctly reflect your immigration status. When you eventually apply for naturalization, your tax record may be reviewed as part of your case. That connects directly to the next topic, an issue many green card holders encounter only when they are preparing their citizenship application: unresolved tax problems and how they relate to good moral character. As permanent residents move toward the next step in their journey, U.S. citizenship, they often discover that their tax history suddenly becomes very important. When you apply for naturalization, immigration officers look at several parts of your background, including whether you meet the legal standard of good moral character for the required period before your application. One of the ways they evaluate this is by checking how you have handled your financial obligations, including federal taxes. This does not mean that simply owing taxes automatically blocks you from citizenship. Many people legitimately end up owing, especially if they're self-employed, run a business, or have complex finances. The greater concern arises when tax obligations are ignored or not addressed. If a green card holder has multiple years of unfiled returns, unpaid IRS balances, or long-standing tax issues they've made no effort to resolve, immigration authorities may conclude that the person hasn't met the good moral character requirement. There's an important difference, though. If you owe money but are actively working with the IRS, for example, through an installment plan or a formal resolution, that effort often shows responsibility, not avoidance. What immigration officers generally look for is whether you acknowledge the problem and took steps to fix it. The more serious concerns arise when someone intentionally fails to file or deliberately hides income. Tax evasion is a crime in the U.S., and criminal convictions can create serious immigration consequences. In such cases, a person may face both financial and immigration problems, potentially affecting their ability to keep their status or become a citizen. This is why it's so important for green card holders to keep up with their tax filings and address problems early instead of letting them pile up. Fixing an issue now is far better than discovering, during the naturalization process, that an old tax problem has turned into a major barrier. While many people focus on the risk side of U.S. taxes, there are also important benefits that permanent residents should know. One of the most valuable is the foreign tax credit. This exists because the U.S. recognizes that many green card holders still have financial ties abroad, investments, businesses, or jobs in other countries. In many cases, that foreign income is already taxed by the country where it was earned. Without special rules, this could mean double taxation, paying abroad and again in the U.S. The foreign tax credit is designed to help reduce that burden. If you've paid income taxes to another country on foreign earnings, you may be able to claim a credit for those payments on your U.S. return. In many cases, this credit reduces your U.S. tax bill dollar for dollar based on what you already paid overseas. For example, suppose someone runs a small business in their home country and pays that country's tax on the profits. When they report that same income on their U.S. tax return, they may also be able to claim a foreign tax credit, which can significantly lower or even eliminate any extra U.S. tax on that income. This structure exists specifically to help people with cross-border income avoid being taxed twice on the same earnings. That said, properly using these credits requires accurate reporting and documentation, which is why many green card holders prefer to work with tax professionals experienced in both U.S. and international taxation. Knowing how these rules operate can make a big difference. It allows you to stay fully compliant while using legitimate mechanisms to avoid unnecessary double taxation. There's also another major benefit for certain green card holders with foreign income, one that many don't learn about until they start working overseas. Another important provision is the foreign earned income exclusion. This rule is particularly relevant for permanent residents who spend substantial time working outside the U.S. or who earn employment income while living abroad part of the year. Its purpose is similar to the foreign tax credit, to lessen the risk of double taxation on employment income earned abroad. Under this exclusion, qualifying individuals may be able to exclude a significant amount of their foreign earned income from U.S. taxation, often well over $100,000, depending on the tax year and their specific circumstances. To claim it, taxpayers usually file Form 2555 with their U.S. return and must meet certain tests, such as the physical presence test or the bona fide residence test. These standards look at how long you stayed outside the U.S. and whether you truly established residence abroad during that period. For green card holders who work internationally, employees on overseas assignments, entrepreneurs operating abroad, or professionals who travel extensively, this exclusion can substantially lower the portion of foreign wages subject to U.S. tax. But it's crucial to remember, the income still must be reported. The exclusion works by reducing the taxable part of that reported income, not by allowing it to be left off the return entirely. Many people mistakenly assume that if the income was earned outside the U.S., they don't have to list it. That's not how the rule functions. It needs to be reported first, then the exclusion is applied via the proper form. Used correctly, this rule can provide meaningful relief for permanent residents with international careers. In addition to credits and exclusions, another factor affecting how green card holders are taxed is the network of international tax treaties. The U.S. has tax treaties with many countries. These agreements set out how income should be taxed when a person has ties to more than one country. Treaties often deal with double taxation, residency, and how specific categories of income, like pensions, dividends, or business profits, are treated. A treaty may say which country gets primary taxing rights over certain income, or may reduce the tax rate on particular types of earnings. In practice, this means that depending on where you're from, there may be additional protections or advantages when you file your U.S. taxes. Some treaties carve out special treatment for certain income types, while others create credits or rules for workers, students, or investors who have financial activities in both countries. Because each treaty is unique, green card holders should check whether their country has such an agreement with the U.S. and, if so, what it covers. These treaties can sometimes provide legitimate ways to reduce your tax burden while staying fully compliant. They also help clarify what happens when more than one country claims the right to tax the same income. Even with all these protections, there's an issue many permanent residents rarely consider when filing: how the information on their tax returns can later intersect with immigration records. This is one of the most surprising and most important points because it explains why accuracy and consistency in your tax filings matter far beyond the IRS. One thing that often surprises green card holders is just how closely their tax history can be scrutinized in later immigration processes. When you file your taxes, it may feel like a separate, routine task, but those returns become part of your long-term record in the U.S. Years later, when you apply for citizenship or file immigration petitions for relatives, immigration officers may look at those same returns. A key thing they look for is consistency. The details in your tax filings should match what you report on immigration forms. If there are major differences, it can raise questions about accuracy or honesty. For example, if someone files as single on their tax returns for several years, but later claims on immigration paperwork that they were married during that same period, that inconsistency can prompt questions. In another case, a person might report a certain level of income to the IRS, but present a very different financial picture on a sponsorship form for a family member. When those records don't line up, officials may take a closer look. Not every difference leads to serious problems, but it can create delays, extra document requests, or, in more serious situations, concerns about misrepresentation. Because of this, it's important that your tax returns, immigration forms, and other official documents tell the same story about your income, marital status, and household. For permanent residents who plan to sponsor relatives or eventually apply for citizenship, keeping records accurate and aligned from the beginning can prevent headaches later. There's also a broader point. Many people believe the IRS operates completely in isolation and that tax return data never leaves the tax system. While IRS privacy rules are strict, there are situations where government agencies coordinate or share certain information under the law. That's one reason tax records can sometimes appear in immigration-related cases. For example, if someone is in immigration proceedings or being investigated for serious violations, data from various federal systems may be reviewed. In the past, there have even been legal disputes over how certain taxpayer information was shared. For green card holders, the practical lesson is that whatever you put on a tax form should be accurate, complete, and consistent with what you might submit elsewhere in the future. Tax filings form part of your permanent financial record, and those records can be revisited years later in contexts you might not expect. A mistake made today could surface during a citizenship interview, a sponsorship case, or another immigration review. Understanding how taxes and immigration records can intersect shows why responsible tax compliance is about more than avoiding IRS penalties. It's also about protecting your long-term immigration future. When you step back and look at the full picture, one of the most important things to grasp as a green card holder is that U.S. taxes are not just a matter of money. They form part of the broader record of how you function within the legal system of the country. Every tax year, you are essentially building a documented history of your income, your household, and your obligations. For many people, that history becomes part of the evidence reviewed when they apply for naturalization or sponsor family members. This is why small errors that seem unimportant at the time can create bigger questions later. The good news is that most of these problems can be avoided if you learn the rules early and file correctly. If you keep in mind the key points we discussed, you'll already be ahead of many people who only discover these issues after running into trouble. First, as a green card holder, you must report worldwide income, even when it's earned outside the U.S. Second, use the correct tax form, generally Form 1040 as a resident, not forms meant for non-residents. Third, if you owe taxes, deal with it proactively. Set up a payment plan, or otherwise work with the IRS rather than ignoring the debt. Showing that you address the problem can be very important in later immigration reviews. Fourth, make use of lawful tax benefits available to permanent residents, including the foreign tax credit, the foreign earned income exclusion, and any applicable tax treaties between the U.S. and your home country. These tools exist to prevent unfair double taxation and can make your obligations more manageable when applied correctly. Finally, always ensure that what you report on your tax returns is accurate and matches the information you provide on immigration and other government forms. Consistent, truthful records help protect your credibility and make future immigration steps smoother. In the end, the objective is simple. Protect the permanent resident status you worked hard to obtain and keep yourself on a clear path toward U.S. citizenship if that's your goal. Understanding how taxes fit into the immigration system is one of the most effective ways to avoid unnecessary complications. Many immigrants come from countries with very different tax systems, so it's normal for these rules to feel unfamiliar at first. But once you understand how things work and keep your filings organized, it becomes much easier to stay compliant and confident about your future in the United States. If this explanation from the USA Guide helped clarify key tax issues for green card holders, consider sharing it with others who might benefit. Staying informed, filing correctly, and keeping accurate records are simple steps that can make a major difference in protecting both your financial health and your immigration status for many years.